Hello, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay this time. Always cautious of this mic. Sometimes it cuts out. But anyway, thanks for joining me this evening and thanks for your questions. When I put the post up, were quite a few similarities, again, recurring themes in the questions, although a lot of them were different. There are recurring themes. One of the things I was looking at was how we sometimes think that the control is external. It's in other people, other things like that. We sometimes forget our own agency, our own autonomy. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at ways to maybe handle situations differently. There were questions about people pleasing. There were questions about someone asked about breaking up with someone who's quite emotionally immature. There was even a question about addressing people who are maybe on the dark triad, who are in positions of care and so on. So I thought, yeah, it's about looking at maybe sometime our own locus of control, if you want to call it. Sometimes we think it's external, sometimes it can be, but that does not necessarily mean we're helpless. Something I will begin by saying is that sometimes when we don't, well, human beings as a rule, I think, we tend to struggle. We whenever we don't know things, we need to know things we don't know. We can panic and things like that. And whenever we're struggling with something, we need to know what to do whenever we don't know what to do. These things can bring up even more distress in us. And I think our default, which is quite normal, quite natural, we reach out to others and we'll ask for help, support, a bit of advice, and so on. But I think a lot of the times we might be asking things like, what should I do? What should I do? What's the best course of action? Tell me what to do. What should I do? Nothing wrong with that in the sense that, yes, we are asking for a little bit of advice. I think it can be helpful sometimes to rather ask ourselves, what can I do? Not necessarily what should I do, but what can I do? Whenever we think about what we can do, let's imagine you're in a job. It's an awful job. You're treated badly. You're not paid a lot. You keep getting overlooked for promotion and things like that. And we could be asking someone, what should I do about this? And you might get some good advice, speak to your manager or, go to good old human resources or, just update your CV, get another job. Nothing wrong with those. They're pretty good pieces of advice or whatever. But whenever we ask ourselves, what can I do? Now, you can sit there and you can tolerate it. You can spend the rest of your days there at the same level on the same money. You can do that. So you could do nothing. You could just tolerate it, stick with it. Or you could update your CV. You could start looking around for other jobs, other places. You could maybe enroll in a course, learn new skills to maybe get a different job. When we ask ourselves, what can I do? Even if it sounds fantastical, we think about what we would like to do. What can I do? And we start to rule out the things that aren't going to help us. We start to rule out things that might make things worse. Whatever it is we would like to do, when we get an idea, then the question is, how do I get there from here? And sometimes that kind of advice could be different. I want to get a promotion. So how would I go about it? Well, you might have to distinguish yourself somehow. You might have to learn some more skills. You might have to volunteer to do certain things, whatever, take on a little bit, maybe extra responsibility. So having specific advice about what to do in order to do what you want to do can be a bit more beneficial. So it's a useful question to ask yourself, what can I do? As opposed to what should I do? Okay. Just my thoughts to begin with. And if it's your first time here, by the way, first time tuning in, I would like to say hello. You're very welcome. It's nice to have you here. I do hope you get something useful from this evening. Bear in mind, I do tend to waffle a lot, but I do generally try to bring it back to what I'm talking about. Anyway, looking at some of the questions again, looking at that locus of control. Is it internal? Is it external? Okay. There are some things maybe we cannot change. Some things are maybe not ours to change in the first place. And it's worth maybe looking at the difference between the two. But there are things we can do. Again, we can be a bit more assertive, we can be a bit more clear, a bit more level. And one of the ways of doing that is just finding different ways to maybe stand up for ourselves. I like the term we learn to take up a little bit more space, a little bit more room in the world. Okay. We're quite often we're a lot more value than sometimes we give ourselves credit for. Um, so standing up for yourself can begin with just little minor things like practicing a little bit of self-respect, and that could be recognize what you're thinking, what you're feeling, being able to name it, recognizing that your needs are just as important as anyone else's. You have a right to some kind of happiness or some kind of success in your life. You deserve to be listened to. You deserve to be heard. Things like that. So practicing little things like your self-respect, and when it comes to communication, we sometimes think being assertive is being very commanding and even domineering and so on, but not at all. Sometimes it's just being clear and concise. Um, Talking about things maybe from your own perspective. I think, I feel, I've noticed, I would like, I would prefer. I don't like how it feels whenever things like that. Um, that kind of assertive communication and practicing little things like the I statements, owning what's going on with you, recognizing your boundaries, which can be a difficult one because sometimes we don't know what they are until they're crossed. But recognize when it comes to your boundaries, a good way to, if you will, look at those is looking at what's mine and what's yours. Okay, thoughts, feelings, actions, behaviors, things like that. What's mine and what's yours. Recognizing your limits, your values, your integrity, things like that. Tying your boundaries in with being assertive. We can communicate them. We don't always have to over explain them. We can maybe give an account of ourselves if you feel that's what you want to, but you don't have to over explain yourself. I often say the more you over explain yourself, the more ammunition you're given to someone to pick them apart. It's like the salesman. Think of the salesman, the salesperson who wants to sell you something. They've already decided you're going to buy it. You have to explain to them why you're not. And everything you say to them, they're able to pick it apart. The more information you give, some people can just pick it apart, leave you floundered, um, as if it's difficult for you to say no, as if you can't say no. You have to have an excuse. You have to have a reason. No, you don't have to. Again, just be clear and concise and don't over explain or justify yourself. Um, Ways to do this, if it's something you struggle with, is just to start small, little kind of low risk situations, if you will. It could be with maybe a shop assistant, it could be someone a friend, someone you feel very close with, and it could be just something as simple as changing your mind or saying, no, I would prefer, something else or whatever. So take little, small, tiny risks in low stakes situations and keep paying attention, because quite often the other person isn't overly offended. They're not annoyed with you. They're not going to reject you or whatever. If they're low stakes situations, you probably find that your confidence begins to build as you see they're really okay with your no. Okay. The other thing is, and this would be true in anything that we struggle with, and that's learning to accept discomfort. We don't like to feel things we don't like to feel. We don't like to feel embarrassed. We don't like to feel as if we're doing wrong. We don't like to feel as if we're hurting someone or disappointing them or whatever. Sometimes we have to learn to sit with the disappointment, or rather, sit with the discomfort, rather. Um, the more we expose ourselves to things we're uncomfortable with, what you generally find is your comfort zone starts to widen. You start to become a bit more confident, a bit more courageous. So we learn to sit with the discomfort of maybe telling someone no. Again, not necessarily over explaining ourselves. And the more you do that, it might not be the first time, it might not be the third, it might not necessarily happen in an afternoon, but what you might find is eventually, as I say, you start to become a little bit more courageous and a little bit more confident. You can find saying no to the people that might bother you or intimidate you or whatever. Be comfortable with how awkward it feels as well, because sometimes we really are stepping out of our comfort zone, and that's not always easy. Okay. Going back to the boundaries, I said about things like communicating them firmly. Sometimes we don't know a boundary is being crossed, or we don't know what our boundaries are until they're crossed, and what we might feel is overwhelmed, especially if you're in a situation or an environment where people continually cross them. Now, what I would say is sometimes people don't know they're crossing your boundary because we haven't made it clear. They don't know. Um, Other times, maybe they do know and they just go ahead and do it anyway. That can be, well, crossing boundaries. I would say if someone knows exactly what they're doing and they're doing it with intent, that's not just crossing a boundary, that's actively violating a boundary. So it's worth paying attention to those, about being able to communicate them firmly before it becomes overwhelming. And again, just being clear and concise, not apologizing for saying no or telling someone what they did was hurtful or inappropriate or whatever. You don't need an excuse. I'm going to go out on a limb here. You don't necessarily need to feel guilty either. Okay. Going back to what's mine and what's yours, you do not own their discomfort. You haven't done that to them. You haven't given it to them. You haven't caused it. Okay. That's their reaction to not getting their own way. Okay. Something that can be helpful, and again, it comes back to the sitting with the discomfort, is letting go of the fear of the disapproval, the fear of the rejection, and things like that. Again, we don't like to feel things we don't like to feel, and sometimes the default is to say yes. We will go into fawning, we will go into people pleasing and things like that, because we don't want to be rejected and we don't want people thinking badly of us and so on. Sometimes we'll again learn to sit with that discomfort, and the more we do it, the less uncomfortable it becomes, the easier it becomes. So moving on from that, looking at, I mentioned a moment ago, things like the fawning response, it is worth paying attention to the patterns and the people where we might find ourselves fawning. Now, fawning is, if you will, it can be a normal response to something, just like all our responses can be to certain situations, the fight, the flight, the fawning, the freezing, all that sort of thing. I like to paraphrase them and sum them up, and look at them sort of in a strange, curious kind of way. It's punch it in the face or run for your life. Okay, that's your fight or flight. Sometimes the fawning is, be its friend. It won't hurt you if you're nice to it. The phrasing could be like, don't move. Can't, I can't see if you don't move. It's like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, things like that. When we recognize our responses in different situations, because sometimes it might be the same person, the same group of people, or the same type of person, it might not be the same in every situation. So it is worth paying attention to when the situations come up, because there could be other situations where someone might be behaving in a certain way, and that triggers our fight response. There are other times and it's going to maybe trigger our flight response. It's worth paying attention to the different situations when these different responses come up. Pay attention as well to maybe what's going on where there's this belief that you have to automatically please people. You don't give them bad news. You don't tell them what they don't want to hear. The default is always yes. And then afterwards you're thinking, damn, this is going to cost me a lot. I should have said no. Pay attention to what's going on with you where these reactions might be like automatic. Something you might find useful in a situation is not putting yourself under pressure to answer straight away. If you're asked something that you don't feel comfortable saying no about, but you really don't want to say yes about, just buy yourself a bit of time. You tell them you'll think about it, tell them you'll get back to them, whatever it is. Whatever it is you're doing, you're really just buying time to practice the no. Okay, you haven't confirmed anything, you haven't promised them anything, you just told them you would think about it. You can give yourself that space to respond. When you're giving yourself that space to respond, you could be asking yourself, is this really in my best interest? Do I really want to say yes? Is what they're asking reasonable? Is it unfair? Is it fair or whatever? It doesn't do any harm either to sometimes prioritize your own needs. Some people would say that that's selfish. I would argue that it can be. But what you're looking for is balance. The way I look at balance is it's always trying to get the middle path. You need to pay attention to yourself, your own needs, thoughts, feelings, boundaries, all the rest of it. You need to pay attention to the things that are in your best interest. If you only ever think of yourself, then we're going into the realms of narcissism. Okay? Narcissistic people are self-absorbed. They are the center of the universe. No one else matters. Okay? So you do pay attention to your own needs, wants, things like that, but you also pay attention to other people. Because what you want, is it fair? Is it reasonable? What's it going to cost other people? What's the impact going to be on them? Is what they're asking, is it reasonable? Is it something you really could help with? Whatever. It is worth paying attention to other people. If we spend too much focus on other people, that's when we go into things like the codependency and stuff like that. We become a doormat, if you will. We can become a doormat. So we pay attention to both. Okay, it's trying to find that balance between both. It's not necessarily selfish to pay attention to our own needs and to prioritize our own needs sometimes, because even if someone else is dependent on us somehow for whatever reason, we're of no use to them if we're burnt out. We're of no use to them if we're exhausted. We are of no use to them if we don't do things for ourselves once in a while. Okay, so it is worth paying attention to the things we need to do to prioritize the things that we need ourselves. Going back to the tolerating discomfort, things like no, especially if it's the first time, can feel a bit overwhelming, can make us feel very nervous, very anxious. We don't know how it's going to go down. But like I said a moment ago, sometimes we have to face the things we're uncomfortable with. We have to maybe let go of this fear of disapproval and things like that, this fear of rejection. It's just something about the rejection. It's something I said in the video one time. If we fear being rejected by people, sometimes it's worth paying attention to the people we fear rejecting us. Okay? Don't look at where they are or what they have or what they can do and things like that. Look at the character. Look at the person themselves. Is that the kind of person you want to be accepted by? So it's just something to think about, okay? So pay attention to that fear of disapproval and rejection. Something else that can help is to surround yourself, or at least get involved with on some level, people who are supportive, people who will listen to you, people who will value your no, people who will appreciate your yes, okay? Pay attention to those people. People where you don't feel pressurized. If you do something for them, you're doing it out of kindness of your own heart, out of your own abundance, out of whatever. You're doing it because you're making an active choice. You're choosing to. You're not doing it because you feel obligated. You're not doing it because you fear saying no. Something else that came up, one of the questions that came up, which I thought was interesting, was being comfortable with the silence. Now, this is actually something I used to struggle with. I'm going to tell you something. I used to work in this place, and there was a woman that worked in it, and she had this uncanny knack of making people speak, getting them to say things, And how she would do it is she would just stare at them silently. She would ask them a question and you would answer her, but then she'd just stare at you silently. And people felt under pressure to say more. It was really uncomfortable. And it's only years later that I realized it was, I don't know, it was actually quite manipulative, I suppose, what she was doing. It was relying on the fact that people feel uncomfortable with the silence. They feel as if they have to fill it with something. But something to think about is being able to reframe the silence where it's not necessarily a negative. It might be uncomfortable, but it's not necessarily a negative. You can use it for, again, space to gather your thoughts. It could be place to gather your thoughts, place to think about what kind of response you might want to give. If you've already given a response, you could be aware that this person is maybe just looking at you, staring at you because they want you to say more. Either they want more information or they want more that they can pick apart. With that, what we're doing is we're learning to sit in the silence. We're learning to sit with the discomfort. It's not necessarily our discomfort. We feel uncomfortable with it, but it's not necessarily something that we're doing. We don't necessarily need to fix it. Instead of rushing to maybe fill that silence, just allow the moment to exist. Focus on your breathing if you have to. Focus on the other person's reaction. You don't need to stare at them, you don't need to do that. But just be mindful of your own presence, be mindful of theirs as well. Again, focus on things like your breathing and so on. I like to put it that what we do is we observe. We don't absorb. We observe, we don't react. We're not necessarily going to fill that space because we feel obligated to. We observe it. We recognize it's uncomfortable. Who knows? It might be uncomfortable for them as well. We don't know. Or it could be, as I'm convinced with that lady I used to work with, no, it's just a way of trying to get you to say something that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have wanted to say. You can also use silence sometimes to your advantage, if you will. It can show a bit of confidence. You don't feel pressurized into filling the space. You're comfortable in your own space, in your own presence, in your own self. You've already answered. You don't need to go any further. It's up to the other person to either ask a follow-up question or just to accept your answer. So you can use it to your advantage, as I say, either using it to gather your thoughts, to observe the moment, not necessarily reacting, or showing your own level of confidence that you don't need to fill the silence. You're okay with the discomfort. Sometimes in therapy, silence can be very, very useful. You don't necessarily need to fill the silence because sometimes you're talking to someone or they're talking to you, whatever. That silence can be very useful space between two people in the sense that it gives them both space to process what's just been said. Okay? We don't necessarily need to jump in with an answer or a response or a question or anything like that. It can be it can be a useful thing. And I think we can use silence in our ordinary conversations as well. We don't necessarily need to say fill that space with something. Little restful pauses here and there aren't necessarily a bad thing. So we can practice it even in our ordinary conversations. If you have to, maybe practice engaging just to get used to silence. Maybe engage in silent activities, even if there are other people around. Now, it's not that we're being antisocial and we're cutting them out. But what we're doing is we're just quietly doing whatever it is we're doing. Now, that could be something as simple as reading a book. Unless you're reading it out loud or something, you're reading it to an audience. We tend to read quietly anyway. Could be things like meditating, just going for a walk, whatever it is, or sitting in a library, whatever it is. Engaging in quiet moments, doing little quiet things can help. Again, we get used to it, so our comfort zone starts to widen. We get used to the quiet, we get used to the silence. And as I say, whenever we get used to it, maybe we can use it a bit more constructively, not necessarily feel a little bit of pressure to fill it. I'm trying to think. I did have a list of some of the questions somewhere, and I made a note of them, except I don't know where they are. What do I have? Yeah, there was a question that came in, and that was about the difference between narcissism and codependency. That would probably be a live stream all on its own. But what I will say is they are distinct, they are different, although there can sometimes be, with a lot of things, there can be a little bit of crossover. I would say the biggest difference, I imagine, would be the biggest difference would be with narcissism, we see someone who's very self absorbed. It's all about them, themselves, their self. It's all about them, their very own self. The focus is always them, and everyone else is there to validate, collude, and things like that. So, with narcissism, the focus is very much on the self. With codependency, the focus is on the other person. It's like, I'm okay when you're okay. I'm okay when you tell me okay. When you tell me I'm okay, and things like that. They would be the two biggest difference. The narcissism is self-focused, whereas codependency is outwardly focused. It's focused on the other person. Go back to things like the locus of control. If we believe that, what people think of us, whether or not we're liked, approved of, the decisions we make, we need other people's permission, or they know better than us, and so on. That's like the focus is always outside. It's up to the other person to tell me I'm okay, to tell me I'm doing a good job. Finding it very hard to recognize maybe our own accomplishments, our own skill sets, our own qualities, and things like that. Recognizing our own experiences as well. Um, the focus of control, if it's always external, it's like other people will have control, maybe even over how we're seeing ourselves sometimes. So it is worth paying attention to where that locus of control is. The other thing about looking at that locus of control is it's not that we shouldn't care. Going back to the boundaries, what's mine and what's yours, it doesn't necessarily mean we don't care about other people, especially if we are paying attention to our own needs and things like that. It's not necessarily that we don't care. It's just that one of the questions I remember was something about breaking up with somebody who's quite emotionally immature. It's not that we don't care, it's sometimes recognizing the difference between caring about and caring for. Okay, we can care about someone in the sense that we wish them well, we don't want anything bad happening to them. Caring for them is when we would be doing everything for them. And sometimes some people do need help, support, encouragement, things like that. But sometimes what we're actually doing is we could be enabling a certain behavior. So that is something to be mindful of. We can care about someone, we can give them a bit of advice, we can be supportive. That's different from trying to fix them and trying to rescue them, trying to do things for them. Going back to the what's mine and what's yours, this doesn't mean we don't care, but sometimes we have to give people permission to go and mess up. We have to give them permission to be disappointed. We have to give them permission to captain their own ship, if you will. I think when you recognize the most we can do is encourage, motivate, influence, things like that. Relationships and things tend to be a lot easier to navigate, not just with partners, but maybe with family members, work colleagues, friends, things like that. Yeah, the most we can do is influence, encourage, and things like that. And it doesn't mean that we don't care. It doesn't mean that we don't, we wish them all the best. We hope things really do work out for them. But we have to give them permission to find their own way. And that's not about being cruel. That's not about being self-centered. Not at all. I remember how I got onto that. Oh yeah. The question was about someone who's emotionally immature. So yeah, it's the difference between caring about and caring for. Again, that would go back to our boundaries. What's mine and what's yours? Okay. Lastly, the last thing I wanted to cover was someone had asked a question about ADHD. Now, I'm not an expert in ADHD and I'm not going to pretend to be, but I do know one or two people that know a thing or two, and I did ask on your behalf. There are some things people can find useful, and again, I think it's useful for looking at our locus of control, okay, as well. The stuff we can do ourselves, the stuff we can do to, you know, sail our own ship, if you will, be captain of our own ship. Some things we can do that are very useful for slowing down racing thoughts, like ruminating thoughts, things like that, anxious thoughts. The questions like, but what if this and what if that, and so on. Little things we can do, little grounding exercises, and I've said this a few times on the live streams and so on. Sometimes it's useful to get into the habit of just peppering your day with little things to remind yourself of what you're doing in this moment. Okay. And that could be something as simple as right now I'm having a coffee. Right now I'm having a glass of Coke. Right now I'm talking to people over the internet. Right now I'm brushing my teeth. Right now I'm going to walk the dog. Right now I'm checking my phone. Whatever it is, get into the habit of peppering your day with little things that you're doing right now in this moment. Okay. You can take that a little bit further. Right now I happen to think, or right now I have the thought. Minds tend to jump all over the place. Minds wander. That's what they do. When we recognize it's a thought, we don't push it away, we don't try and avoid it, but nor do we necessarily have to carry it through to its conclusion. If you want to, that's up to you. It's not for me or anyone else to say what you're thinking isn't important. Only you can discern that. But what you choose to do is you recognize it's a thought. You can choose to think about it, or you can choose to maybe think about it later on. Because right now, you go back to doing whatever it is you're doing. Right now, I'm, brushing my teeth, whatever. Take it a little bit further. Right now, I happen to feel. And this is where things like emotional literacy, emotional intelligence is useful, and journaling can be helpful with this. It's about looking at things like, we'll say anxious, we'll say stressed, we'll say angry. When we try to go a little bit deeper, I feel uncertain, I feel overwhelmed, I feel threatened, I feel insecure, I feel whatever it happens to be. Right now, I happen to feel, and each and every time the key term is right now, because it's of the moment, it'll pass, it always does. Each and every time it's right now, and then you go back to doing whatever it is you were focused on previously. You don't try and push things out of your head. Whenever they do that, they tend to get more upsetting, if you will, more obsessive sometimes. No, you gently leave it alone. Bring your mind back to what you need to do. Journaling can be helpful for that. Some people find mood diaries. I have a video out there that I took a clip from a live stream on how to structure a mood diary. If you think it would be useful, just hunt through my channel, you'll find it. If mood diaries, journaling isn't for you, maybe just do a bit of a brain dump. And all that is something as simple as writing down everything that's in your head without filtering it, and do it for about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is. Set a time limit. Just write it all down. It can help you declutter what's going on in your head. This wouldn't necessarily be ADHD, but I can sort of visualize how this could be useful. I can imagine rather how this could be useful, and that's sometimes we pick one task and we focus on the one task at a time. Now, in our mind, all of us, at some level, our minds jump all over the place. But again, whatever it is, we focus on the one simple task. We choose one thing to do. And that could be something as simple as I'm going to wash the dishes. Now, again, your mind's going to wander while you're washing dishes, but you pick one thing and you focus on each cup, each plate, each spoon, whatever it is. I just realized I said the word spoon in a very weird way there. I wonder what's going on. Anyway, focusing on the one task at a time. Not every single task, by the way, but just getting into the habit of focusing. Every now and again, you focus on the one thing, and that's what you're doing. Going back to the right now I am, whatever it is Right now I'm washing the dishes. Right now I'm going to make a coffee. Okay. Sometimes our thinking habits, our anxieties, our stresses, our worries, sometimes even the thought of having a difficult conversation with someone, sometimes that can bring up an energy. So we can feel restless. We can feel very restless. We get agitated. We can't sit still. We're wandering back and forward, not just in our own head, but you know, even in the room. Sometimes it can be useful to try to get rid of that excess energy, and people do different things. It could be going for a brisk walk. Some people want to do star jumps, whatever it is. They'll go to the gym if they have something already planned. They're going to the gym, they go for a run, whatever it is. It can be useful to find ways to get rid of the excess energy that we have, because sometimes when without that energy, it can be a bit easier to think things through. There is an exercise, I think I might have talked about this previously. If I haven't, then it's the first time I've mentioned it. But um, there is an exercise, and to the best of my knowledge, it's an exercise that actors used to do before they went out on stage back in the days when they were calling it things like stage fright. Um, what they do, or rather, what you do is you just face the wall. You stand against the wall, you face the wall, and you lean your hands up against the wall. Okay, get yourself as comfortable as you want, but you're standing, leaning up against the wall. From the very soles of your feet, you start to push. You push up through your legs, up into your stomach, where we often hold a lot of tension and so on, up into your shoulders, and press into the wall. Okay, the whole way up through your body. You press into the wall. Push as hard as you want, push as soft as you want. What you don't want to do is hurt yourself. Okay, very important. You do not want to hurt yourself, nor do you want to push the wall over. Um, but you press the whole way up through your body and press into the wall. And as you're doing it, you try to visualize whatever the tension is, whatever the fear is, whatever it is. You try to imagine that traveling along your arms and just dissipating into the wall harmlessly. Okay. And as you're doing that, don't force anything, but just try to notice anything you begin to feel differently. Okay. Now, if it's pain, please stop. Okay. You don't want to hurt yourself. But what you might find is a shift in the energy. You might find like knots in your stomach start to loosen, things like that. Without forcing it, you just do it and you notice the difference. It's a very passive way of getting rid of that unwanted energy. They say actors used to do it before they went out on stage. Some people do it before they go in for a job interview or before they have to give a presentation or something. Some people do it before they have to have a difficult conversation. Because again, things like our voice could be nervous, things like that, our heart's beating in our chest, we're shallow breathing, things like that. In the absence of the energy, sometimes it's easier to think a little bit more clearly. So maybe try that exercise, see what you think. As I say, you don't want to don't want to hurt yourself. You don't want to break the wall either. And I suppose I better add a caveat, I suppose, a little bit of a disclaimer. Pressing into the wall is probably not a spectator sport. Okay, you might want to go somewhere quiet, otherwise people are wondering what you're doing. Um, so maybe go somewhere quiet and try that. Um, but as I say, it's a very passive way of getting rid of energy that we don't want to do. That's if you don't want to go for a brisk walk or star jumps or whatever. So I think I have covered pretty much all of the questions. I did make a note of them and I have no idea where they are. So they're the ones that I remember anyway. Largely, it's about this sense of control. The other thing, it's just popped into my head just as I'm thinking this about control. Sometimes we think we have to do or say something that's going to make the other person listen. It's going to hear us. They're going to understand. They're going to accept whatever it is. And that's good when we can do that. Sometimes sometimes you just might be dealing with someone who doesn't want to listen. So it doesn't matter. No matter, what should I say? What should I do? there ain't going to be an answer because they've set out not to hear you, not to listen to you. They just keep on grinding you down till they get what they want. When that's the case, you're not trying to change their mind. You're just sticking to your guns, if you will. You're standing your own ground. You're just being a bit clearer, a bit more assertive. You've already given an answer. You have to learn how to be okay with the silence. If they start disapproving, if they start doing whatever it is they do, um, even practicing that, buying yourself a little bit of time, a little bit of space, saying things like, I'll think it over. You don't have to answer it straight away. And it doesn't matter what they keep coming back with. No, I said I would think it over and I will get back to you. Sometimes it does come down to being like a broken record. Whenever you answer, if you do give an account of yourself and they want more detail, more whatever, sometimes we just have to say, I've already answered. It's not a nice way of putting it. It is really annoying when someone speaks to you like this, but sometimes you just have to put on your best customer care tone of voice. Sound like an HR memo, try and take the emotion out of it. You're just being factual. We're not trying to antagonize people. We're not trying to upset them. But what we're not trying to do is we're not giving that salesperson an inch to talk us into buying something we don't want. We're just being clear, concise, assertive, and all the rest of it. I hope I've covered everything. I don't know if I have. Those things can help with difficult situations, difficult conversations, the stuff that comes up with us, our reactions, fight, flight, fawn, things like that, paying attention to what's going on, where they come from, and so on. What I would say is the stuff that I talk about on a live stream are just very, very general. Everybody's different. Everybody's experiences are different and so on, and how they manage things are going to be different. It's really about finding your own stuff. It's a lot easier if you're working with a therapist and you can do this sort of stuff one-to-one, not just looking at different ways of coping and managing in certain situations, but also understanding what's going on with you internally when these things come up. Big believer in awareness being a very powerful thing, because it'll always give you a choice. But anyway, that's me. Let's go back and start looking at questions. Let me see where we go. Tim says Sunday evening is best spent with Darren. That's very kind of you. To be fair, I wouldn't really want to spend Sunday evening with me, but it's nice that you're here. I prefer nice company, good company. But I do hope you find something useful. Oh, Tim also says it's worth trying to take life less seriously sometimes too. There is something in that. It is a defense mechanism, whenever we laugh at things. It can be a healthy one. I think there is something healthy in being able to look at the absurdity of life sometimes, the absurdity of ourselves as well. There can be something quite healthy in that. Annie asks, does using the I statement mean I'm a controlling partner? It depends on how you're using it, I guess. I would err on the side of caution and say no. Unless it's I want this, I want that, and it's all my way, and I noticed that you're this and you're the other thing, and you're the like all things, it can be twisted and manipulated by manipulative people. When you're using it, it's like I say, you're being authentic. You're owning what's going on with you. I think, I feel, I've noticed, I would like, I need. Who are you controlling when you do that? Even if someone is behaving in a certain way, there is a big, they're being really horrible. There's a huge difference between saying to them, you're a monster, you're an idiot, you're a fool, whatever it is. You scrape my brain whenever you do that. I'm sick of you doing that. You better stop it. There's a difference between that and I feel uncomfortable whenever you do that. I'd rather you didn't. Two ways of saying exactly the same thing. Okay. And one of them is like an accusation. The other one is owning what's going on with you when that behavior happens. So no, you're not necessarily being controlling. I wouldn't say so. As I say, manipulative people can twist it and try to make it so, but other than that, no. So we get to Vicky Davison Hunt says self-worth is the key for sure. So know you deserve before you try to achieve something. Once I learned that in my 30s, everything changed. Let me see if I can get that. Let me see. Self-worth is the key. Yeah. So you know you deserve before you try to achieve something. Yeah, and be realistic with it as well. I'll never be president of the USA because, first of all, I'm not an American citizen, so I need to be realistic. Secondly, would I really want the job? Do you see what comes with it? No, you're okay. But anyway, being realistic, but recognizing our self-worth. Yeah, and this is the thing about self. When we put the word self in front of something, I believe a lot of the time it's not so much what I'm thinking. It's what I think other people are thinking of me, such as my self-confidence, my self-esteem, my self-worth. It's a lot of the time it's how I think others are seeing me, what they're thinking of me, and how much they value me, and so on. So it is worth paying attention to when we're talking about things like self-worth, what we actually mean. Knowing your value, knowing what you contribute, knowing what you're capable of, things like that. You might not necessarily have a skill in something. That does not mean you can't do it. That doesn't mean you can't learn it. Okay. All of us have different parts of us that are maybe untouched, untapped into, things that we don't even know. And I think they go deeper than our blind spots. And if I was to put it to you this way, if I was to ask someone, can you play the violin? And they said no, I could ask them, well, how do you know you're not the world's best violinist? Because they've never tried. They've never learned how to play, So there are things within us, again, that we haven't really tapped into. So it is worth paying attention to those little things. So where do we get to? Let me see. Questions. It's easier when there's a question mark, because then I can recognize them. What if you don't want to hurt a narcissist's feelings? For example, a family member. Well, again, we don't necessarily want to hurt anybody, whether they're a narcissistic person or not. But we cannot necessarily be responsible for how someone reacts to something, how they feel about something. If I put it into a context, what we can't do is we cannot throw stones at people and tell them it's not me that's hurting you, it's the stones. Okay? It's the bricks, it's the rocks. We can't do that. We have to take some kind of responsibility. But we don't own how someone feels at being told no to something or having their behavior pointed out to them. We don't own those things. We're not responsible for those things. We don't like it because we didn't set out to upset them, and we can empathize, we can sympathize, of course. But that's the other person's reaction. That's how they're taking something. Okay. Where do we get to? Let me see. Another question. It's easier. It is easier when there's a question mark because I know it's a question. Well, Kirsten Phil says my purpose with communicating here was just in the hope of getting to get advice from Darren, not the chat. Sorry, misunderstanding. Well, I don't know what came before that, but what I would say is when it comes to advice, the only advice I ever give is please don't ask me for advice. I just talk about things generally. I do hope you get something useful from this, by the way, but they're very general. And as I say, it's best to maybe talk to a coach or a therapist face to face. I'd like to think that what I do is I can outline concepts, things that you might find useful, things like that. But I do hope you get something from it. Hope you find it helpful. That's the important thing. And something from Daniel. Ruminating mostly at night, and I'll feel anxious, and that keeps me up. Now that you said that, I think I do try to suppress the anxious thoughts that makes it feel bigger. Yeah. Um, Problems, difficulties, issues, conflicts, things like that that are suppressed are not resolved. They're hidden. We mask them. Not necessarily a bad thing to do that in the short term because it can help us get through something, whatever it is we have to do. In the long term, it's not so good. It has to come out somehow, and sometimes it becomes worse. And I think with things like anxiety, a lot of the time in the longer term, a lot of the time it becomes more a fear of the fear rather than a fear of whatever it is we're anxious about. It's the fear of feeling that way. And our brains are tricky things, I think, because sometimes our brains start to look for things that fit the feeling, and then we start to avoid those. And even struggling, sleeping at night, I'm just thinking, going to sleep at night, if we think, well, I don't like going to bed because that's when I start to think about bad things. So we now have an association that going to bed is a bad thing. So that's going to create more anxiety. So it is about trying to find ways to break that cycle. One of the ways of doing it is maybe finding new associations with going to bed. Maybe looking at different routines before you go to bed, things like that, things that change your routine. I'm trying to think of the term that's used. The sleep hygiene, I think they call it, isn't it? The things that can help you rest a bit more at night. Sometimes, and I have done live streams and things like that, looking at managing anxiety, rumination, things like that. So it might be worth looking at those things. Sometimes it takes a little bit of reframing, understanding what's going on with us, but being able to cognitively reframe some of our thoughts. We could be assuming the worst about something. Something awful is going to happen, and it's going to be abysmal, and it's all going to be my fault, and so on. Maybe just asking ourselves questions to actually challenge those kinds of thoughts. Questions like, well, how do I know that? How do I know what's going to happen? Can I prove it's going to happen? Can I prove it won't? Have I any evidence either way? How do I feel whenever I think like this? What if I was wrong? What if it doesn't happen at all? What we're doing is we're breaking that cycle. And we're starting to introduce different things into it. We're giving ourselves control over the ruminating thoughts, the racing thoughts. Okay, so little things like that might be useful for you. Let me see where did we get to. Where did we get to? Okay, I think I've come to the end of the questions. I've always skipped quite a few. There's a lot of comments, but and it's good, as I say, people are finding things useful. But there we go. It's coming up to 9 anyway, just before 9. I might get away a little bit early. I might get myself a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit. I hope you find this evening helpful. Remember what I was saying, it's about looking at the sense of control. Where do we think the control lies? Is the control external? Okay, there's something we need to do, something we want, something we don't want to do, whatever it is. Is the control external? Is it dependent on other people? Is it dependent on their approval? Is it dependent on them not knowing? Is it dependent on whatever? Or is it internal? Think of the question I asked at the very beginning. It's not always about what should I do. It's about what can I do? What is within my power? What is within my remit? What is mine to change here? What is mine to do differently? Where would I like to be? Going back to, can't remember who it was, but somebody mentioned about the self-worth. Yeah. Am I of more value than this? Again, you could be in that job that's paid very badly and you're treated very badly. Recognizing your own intrinsic sense of value, that you are capable of contributing more, maybe somewhere else that you'd be appreciated, or maybe contributing more where you are at the minute to be able to distinguish yourself, to maybe get a promotion or whatever it is. What is within your control and what isn't? What we cannot do is we cannot change other people. We cannot control them. A lot of people on my channel have been in situations and environments where people did try to control them. That does not go well and never ends well. It's not a good thing. It's not pleasant at all. What we have to remember is we can't control them either. To say the most we'll ever do is encourage, influence, motivate, things like that. Negotiate with, even perhaps. So we look at what we can do. Tomorrow evening's video, rather, I am looking at, and this is actually a sequel, I guess, to a video that I did maybe about 3 years ago. It's looking again at toxic shame, not just shame, but when the shame becomes toxic, the impact that can have. What is it that makes shame toxic? The way it can be ongoing and so on. So I'm looking at the concept of toxic shame. This time, I'm also looking at where it can come from and some ways to address it, some ways to overcome it, okay, to challenge it, if you will. So that will be out UK time, 6:30 tomorrow evening. Looking at toxic shame. I do hope there's something interesting, helpful in it for you. I hope you find this evening helpful. And until next time, until next Sunday, when I will be back again, I will put out the little post thing, whatever it is. I'll put that out saying that I'm going live, and I'll ask for ideas, things that you want me to cover, things that you want me to answer. And until then, as always, look after yourselves, take care, and I'll see you next week.